And so this morning we're joined on our coffee date by the City of Cape Town's coastal manager as well as the Deputy Mayor, respectfully not the same person, Gregg Oelofse, Alderman Eddie Andrews, to find out about the projects that are underway here in Ward 64. Ward 64 covers the Kalk Valley area, Fishhook, Glencairn, parts of the Kalk Bay Sports Shooting Club, Kalk Bay, Lakeside, parts of Muizenberg, and also parts of up until Prince George Drive. It is what I consider to be the heart of the Deep South here in Cape Town. Eddie, Deputy Mayor, thanks so much for joining us. After living in Mitchell's Plain for most of your life, you are now part of the South Peninsula, a Plumstead resident, but your work being noted in providing for the residents of this area. Good morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Lester, and thank you for having us for coffee here at the amazing Dalebrook Cafe.
You should have joined me earlier. I was in Dalebrook Pool.
I am hoping to go there after this interview. I would have, if I'd known, I would have joined you this morning.
And so it's a great place to start when we talk about the connection between municipal issues of delivery, but also issues of environmental management. Tidal pools are public amenities, but they're also part of the larger environmental picture of the City of Cape Town. How important is it to you?
Lester, very important. I think most people don't know we've got just over 300 kilometers of coast. We've got quite a few tidal pools that are frequented right through the day, the early morning, late in the evening as well. But more importantly, how people interact with issues around the environment. I think that is important. Our department is responsible for that. And our coastal management team, and Greg heads up that unit, ensure how the infrastructure is repaired and maintained, primarily to ensure that the end user's his experience is enhanced. I think that is important. You spoke about Muizenberg. We've got an amazing program currently underway looking at the feasibility of upgrading that, widening the pedestrian footway, the ablution blocks, and possibly other amenities in the periphery. There's a strong economic interface, and so we love that and we appreciate that. It's all about putting people first, and of course cars second.
Greg, I want to bring you into this conversation. Municipal issues and environmental management go hand to hand in the city. We spoke last week with regard to the beached whale in Strand Beach. We've got a heck of a lot of calls to our show wanting to ask questions of you about various coastal management issues. One of them from a listener asking about the removal of sand from the railway line at Simonstown. Also wondering what's happening to that beach sand that has been removed. You were telling me off air that is in fact not the city, that is a mandatory responsibility of PRASA has been doing that one.
That's correct, Lester. So PRASA clears the sand in the sort of northern edge of the Simonstown beach because of summer southeaster winds blows it over the railway line and makes it impossible for them to utilize that railway line. We from the city do ask them to clear the sand rather than push it back into the sea because that sand's full of ballast. Ballast is those stones that you'll see under the railway line. And if they push it into the sea, what the sea does is it distributes that ballast and it washes up all over the coastline, and then we'll end up with beaches full of ballast. So we ask them to remove it, and they do that through the summer. It's obviously a challenge because the way our coastline works is through winter we have sand in Kalk Bay that accumulates, so the beaches get thicker. And then in summer the southeaster comes and it blows that sand onto infrastructure. So it's what we would call a wicked problem, where it's difficult to stop the sand and the only way at the end of the day is to remove it. If it was clean sand, we'd just get them to push it back into the sea, but because of the ballast, we ask them to remove it.
Unfortunately, Councillor of Ward 64, Amy Cool, she's on maternity leave at the moment, but she says that you two work very, very closely with her on Ward 64 issues. What we were going to ask her about was the St. James bathing box.
Yes.
Eddie, not too long ago, there was a drive to refurbish and replace them because we had the incident of the fire. Those boxes being burned down. How far are they of being replaced?
Contractors concluded their work, so they're about to hand over the site to us in the coming days. And what is exciting about that particular program is that we've had a competition where we asked residents and interested stakeholders to confirm what their preference would be in terms of the color of it. And we announced that the traditional colors would be kept, and of course those have been painted as such and would be available to use in the December period, when we're expecting a bumper period as well. I think we just now about 95% of our pre-COVID figures in terms of tourism, local tourism as well, and it's exciting to know the project is ready and concluded before the bumper season starts.
We cannot talk about simply just the positives of this particular area. But this Ward 64 deals with all sorts of socio-economic issues like the rest of the city of Cape Town. And we're talking, particularly when I talk to groups looking at issues of homelessness in Muizenberg, it is as prevalent in this particular community as it is in other parts of the city.
Absolutely, Lester. And I think we have to approach the situation with much care. I think everyone's aware that when we approach them, we have to do a proper assessment to understand who needs what sort of assistance, whether it be social assistance, whether it be other employment opportunities. And that assessment is important. So when we approach the courts to offer that assistance, that we have to demonstrate that we've done exactly that. We're also now looking at a safe space in the Muizenberg area. We've got a couple of sites we're looking at, and hopefully in the coming months we will confirm which site would be the preferred option to accommodate those persons, to ensure that they have proper care in terms of medical care, have a proper meal during the day, ablution facilities, and those who are able to, access an employment opportunity. Because the reason why most of them are on the street, because they don't have employment opportunities. The family situation is disintegrated, and we're keen to accommodate them. In the past, we could not accommodate couples, but we now can. And I think that is important, how we must approach the situation with much care.
But here's a question for the Deputy Mayor from Janine Nkomeki. When will the market area at the entrance of Masiphumelele be attractively paved, not tarred, kept clean, be an attractive, inviting and vibrant marketplace, providing good business for stallholders and a lovely meeting place for the community? That's from Janine Nkomeki.
Janine, I won't have the detail to that particular upgrade, but I do know there are quite a few plans in place for Masiphumelele. I've just passed there a couple of weeks ago. We have seen, and I know that the area referred to, it's not just an informal trading area, but there's also a solid waste issue there. People are dumping on the periphery, and of course that must also be responded to. We are engaging with most of our informal settlements for them to understand how to responsibly dispose of both their solid and their liquid waste, because ultimately it impacts on economic impact, it impacts on the city's infrastructure, and the importance of them disposing with responsibility needs to be amplified. And so those conversations are ongoing, and particularly that area, Masiphumelele, it is a priority for the city.
Greg, our coastal areas are this mix between public accessible space, environmental protection, the considerations of business, and also when we bring in state-owned entities like PRASA. Look, it's an absolute delight to have a railway line right on the coastline. But when we talk about all of these issues intermingling and working in harmony, often that doesn't happen. We're talking now about sand and PRASA removing it from the railway line. We were talking earlier to Tracy about issues around the brass bell and access to a public amenity like the brass bell tidal pool there. How important, how much is that of a consideration of all these interest groups playing a part in the better interest of the city and its people?
Yeah, I think, Lester, you've pinned it down perfectly. I think the interesting thing about the coastline is it's the interface between not only the marine and natural environment and an urban environment, but it's also the interface between multiple different authorities and user groups. Particularly here around the South Peninsula, for people that may not be aware, the entire area around this area is part of the marine protected area, as part of Table Mountain National Park. And we also have a lot of interface around different government authorities, from PRASA, who owns large portions of the coastline that runs through the rail corridor. And we also have to work with our colleagues from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment to manage the Kalk Bay Harbour. So in working in the coastal environment here, it's a really integrated space between different authorities, but also different user groups. The one thing that the city's always been committed to, and we have a very strong national act that supports that, is the guaranteed right of access to the coastline. And that relates particularly to areas like the Kalk Bay tidal pools, where our priority is to ensure that people have that access to the coastline, and we apply that very vociferously across the city's coastline, that everyone has the right to access the coastline and to enjoy it in the way that they'd like to do that.
But here's a question with regards to, and what I appreciate about this particular area, whether you live in Retreat, whether you live in Coniston Park, whether you live in Steenberg, whether you live in Kalk Bay, Muizenberg, Massey, Sun Valley, there is this air about being in the South Peninsula of this city. So Russ asks, he lives in Ward 68, which is the Coniston Park area, not too far from us. When will the city clean the various canals in the southern suburbs, especially the Langevlei Canal in the Steenberg? Coniston Park, Ward 68, and the lakeside area. The canal is filthy and unhygienic. The youth play ball games along many areas of the canal and usually have to retrieve their balls from these filthy canals. I'll listen on the radio, says Russ. Eddie?
Thank you, Russ, for that question. I think it's important to acknowledge that we have these waterways within urban areas as well, and it comes back to how we interact with those waterways. That particular canal is part of our Livable Urban Waterways program, where we're looking at enhancing the experience, understanding how you can interact recreationally with the waterways. We have a program where we can actually clean that, and so our water and sanitation department, they have a green jobs program where we have team going into the rivers and the canals, and when of course it's safe to do so, and of course remove the waste there. But that doesn't solve the root problem. The root problem again comes back to how we dispose of both our solid and our liquid waste. And if all of us can play our part, I think those waterways will remain cleaner a lot longer, because ultimately it ends up in our ocean, and we're trying to prevent that. And that's why we install our litter nets to prevent it from reaching our flays and eventually out into our oceans.
I love that I can have a environmental scientist and a politician here, so I can divert the environmental management, the scientific, the biological questions through to Gregg Oelofse. How much of a concern is the disposal of waste? And I'm talking about hard waste into our waterways. I'm originally from the Retreat Steenberg area. I know of the canals that run through every time I visited. And there's the issue that we could label at the city for monitoring and disposal, but also the responsibility that I say should also be placed on residents to keep those canals and canalized water systems also clear. How much of a worry is it for you from an environmental point of view?
Yeah, I think, Lester, it's a really important factor. I think there is an individual responsibility for all of us to look after our waste. The point that I wanted to make is that all the canals and stormwater systems within the city are gravity fed. So in other words, they all end up in the sea. So everything that washes down a canal or a stormwater drain, people often think as the stormwater drains as a drain that you can throw waste into or pour oils down. Just to remind everybody that all of them are gravity built, and they all discharge into the ocean at some point. So every single stormwater drain or canal eventually finds its way through large connected systems to discharge onto our shoreline. So whatever waste we're putting in it, whether it's in Belleville or in Voortrekkere, when it rains, that waste will eventually wash down and find its way to the coastline. So if we can keep that in mind and remember that whatever we throw into the drains finds its way into the sea, we'll look after our environment in a much better way.
What is Gregg's opinion on the proposal of shark permits for just off Strandfontein Pavilion? This has been an application that has been made to the National Department of Environmental Affairs for permits for shark cage diving, I think very, very close to the Sea Point Pavilion area. Parts of that community saying they don't want it. Is there opinion from the city's Marine and Coastal Management Department?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting debate. So just to give it some context is that historically there's been 3 permitted operators that were allowed to do cage diving around Seal Island with great white sharks. That's been going on in Cape Town since about 1993. And we know with the disappearance of the great white sharks from False Bay, we have none in False Bay at the moment, that particular industry, which is a very important part of our tourism offering as Cape Town, was struggling, and what they've asked for is an extension of the permitted area to allow them to cage dive with another species of shark called the bronze whaler shark. Bronze whalers are not known to be harmful to people, but they don't occur in and around Seal Island directly. They occur more in the midwater of the reefs between Strandfontein Pavilion and Seal Island. So the request from the cage divers has been for an extension of the permitted area so that they can allow for tourists to interact with bronze whaler sharks, not great white sharks. So that is a nuance. The city's technical comment has been very much that it's a decision by national government, because shark cage diving is a national government competency, and we have indicated that it's imperative that the local community is engaged and that their opinion is taken into account in terms of the final decision that is made. But the last point I wanted to make is that this is an emotive issue, but people should also try and remember that cage diving is a very important part of what the city offers as part of its tourism package. So we want to support the tourism side, but we're also equally aware of the concerns that local communities raise.
Eddie, I want to raise the last issue with you, and that is we're in a time of the year where we have high fire danger warnings. a howling southeaster, particularly in the deep south. We just recently saw another fire in the Masiphumelele area. It has not just been a problem of this particular administration, but for administrations that go back decades in the city of Cape Town. People asking for long-lasting solutions to a Masiphumelele fire danger, but of course, coupled with that comes with a Masiphumelele housing crisis. What is the city's plans to keep residents of Masiphumelele, and maybe they'll extend that as well, Imizamo Yethu in Kalk Bay as well. We have these informal settlements that yearly face the danger of being destroyed, not just the buildings, the structures, but people's lives as well. What's your response?
Lester, and also with regards to, I think, where we don't have services, so people don't have access to water and electricity, so then they use, of course, candles. And so when, of course, they fall asleep and the candle burns out, of course, it also falls over, and that's also what contributes towards these fires. So what you also observe, because of the high densities, without, before you even blink an eye, you've got hundreds of structures being burnt to the ground. From our side, when we recognize those informal settlements, we want to get them on the database, the housing database, so that down the line they have a housing opportunity. That, in theory, is a very easy exercise, but extremely difficult exercise, because most of those persons living informally have had a formal housing opportunity previously as well. So with the fire concern, I think it's again the responsibility of every single person to be mindful of what you need to do when you're smoking, disposing of your what we call stompie. Please do it responsibly. Leave it in your car. Don't just throw it out the window. When you're living informally as well, be careful in how you're making a fire, so that you confine it to your home. And when you, of course, go sleep, make sure that your candles and every single fire is put out as well. But ultimately, get on the housing database. And we have an informal settlements program where we upgrade those settlements, and of course those who qualify will have access to a housing opportunity. But get on the database, speak to your local ward councillor, and in December period, act responsibly, whether it be your waste disposal, whether it be how you prepare your food. Please be acutely aware of the impact that you may have if you don't do so responsibly.
Gregg Oelofse, Head of Marine Environmental Policy and Strategy. He looks after our oceans and our coastal areas in the city of Cape Town. Deputy Mayor Eddie Andrews, thanks so much for joining us here at the Delbrook Cafe. Really appreciate your time.